Good morning, everybody. This is Natalie coming to you live, Spirit and Coffee. There we go. It's working. Okay, let's get started. Although we already got started on the Facebook Live, I do the Podbean side by side, and sometimes the mic transfers over for some reason, and then I have to restart it again, and it's just a mess. And so, anywho, let's make sure that the volume's. Hey, Rick, is the volume working? Oh, good, it is. Okay. Hey, Betty, how are you? All right, let's get started. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. You guys get to see me go through the growing pains of that. Okay. So the cool thing is, if you guys, I think some of you guys follow me on my personal page. I think pretty much everybody's kind of connected to me both ways. I mean, but I did post something about shame yesterday, and right now what I'm doing is yes, good morning, Betty. Is really looking into the affect of shame. What is shame? How do we deal with shame? How do we deal with those sort of emotional spaces that are uncomfortable? Now, shame is a big one, and I sort of like I like talking about it because I didn't really have the word for it before. I wouldn't say that I called it shame. I would say that I was vulnerable, but not really knowing what I was, kind of talking about. So even in my emotional intelligence class, I'm learning, right? I'm learning. I'm still a student. I'm always a student, and I learn all the time. And so to get clearer and clearer and clearer about how I communicate. So shame itself, right? It really ignites the inadequacies in us. It sort of tells us it's the part of us that says we're not worthy, we're not enough, we can't do it, or it's an embarrassment. Sometimes it comes from disgust. So in the earlier days, right, kind of like when you eat something and you're like, ugh, that's gross, we started to associate that sense of smell and taste to people and individuals in the outside world around us, where we'd go, ugh, I don't care for him, or ugh, I don't care for them, or ugh, everything was disgusting, or ugh, they smell bad, whatever it was, right? And disgust, right, or that dismell is what it was called, was a way for us to sort of distance ourselves from things that were maybe toxic for us or that we didn't particularly like. But in that process, a judgment sort of arose, right? Judgment arises when we do that. So we're like, I'm going to stay away from that. But if we started to look at it with our relationships with individuals, and particularly in marriage, and it's crazy because part of the book talks about marriage and how relationships are going to end when individuals are disgusted with their partner, when they start to go, ooh, I don't, then it's really the end of it, right? And sometimes we don't realize that it's the end of it, and we'll continue to go back. But the reality is that something inside of us is saying, toxic, stay away. So how does this lead to shame? When we feel disgusted in ourselves, when we feel dismell in ourselves, when we're like, oh, I don't like we then have that conversation in our head that ignites shame. And I'm going to give an example for myself. Now, shame for me probably came more from my father. Okay. And I think it's because my father himself, he was really, he was an intelligent man, and I just saw him as the smartest man in the world, right? I thought he was the smartest man in the world, and I wanted to always please him, and I wanted to make sure that I was like as intelligent as him. And he was very articulate. He did puzzles and he did all these cool things. And for me, I thought, wow, this man is really, really intelligent. He also he's a very good storyteller. And so for me, I was like, well, I want to be like him. Well, one time, and this has really been an issue for me in my life. And I'm going to share it with you guys so you guys can understand how it relates to your life. I may have talked about it before, but I was sitting in the car. He asked me to spell a word, and he said, okay, so spell store. And so I literally spelled store, but I believe I spelled it correctly. And he was like, that's not correct. And I'm like, oh. So I tried again. I wasn't correct. He started yelling at me. So if I didn't get it right away, first, he would lose his patience. And second, he would get very frustrated and angry. But he yelled at me to the point where he made me feel stupid, because he said, "What are you, stupid?" And I was like, "Well, I guess." I mean, I don't think I am, but I guess you're telling me I am. So in my mind, I heard that he was telling me I was stupid. Then he continued to yell and be very mean and negative. And I was holding down my tears, right? Because my dad wouldn't let me cry in front of him. He'd always tell me, "I'll give you a reason to cry." All those things that they said back in the day. So I would just holding down my tears because I started to feel disgusted in myself, right? So it triggered that thought process in my head that I'm not good enough. I am not worthy. I am unworthy, right? And those are the conversations that we have when we're talking about shame. Okay, shame is the I'm unworthy. I'm not enough. I don't matter. It comes from that. It comes from the fact that we think that we can't do it. And then we have these inadequacies. Now, here's the deal. And this is why I love being authentic and vulnerable, because people are then you'll get this two-pronged part where people say, "Oh, vulnerability is weakness." Our authenticity means that you're going to really tell people how you feel. Well, that's not truly authenticity. I mean, it can be, but authenticity is really owning your inadequacies. Authenticity is really being able to communicate them, the things inside of you that you feel like you're unworthy of, and the things inside of you that you feel like you can't do, but not being afraid or ashamed to speak about them. That is where the courage comes in. So yesterday I was talking about being vulnerable and being courageous. It takes a lot of courage for people to talk about their inadequacies. They don't want to be seen as disgusting, because in their mind it's disgusting. In their mind it's not good enough. In their mind they're falling short. Okay. And I think that this part is really what our men are going through when we look at the men. Because I know, we talk about genders and like, oh, women this and men this. The reality is we can't heal as a species and a human race if we don't start to talk about these important concepts. The concept that men themselves have been, especially in the Western thought, I'm going to say the Western ideologies or point of view, is that they've been told to keep that part of themselves, to shut up, don't cry, don't show your emotion. So their inadequacies or their unworthiness is held within and not really communicated. Even among each other, I'm sure they don't talk about it. And I don't know any man that's on here, Rick, you want to be brave soul, you want to chime in. But I would almost guarantee that most men will not talk about how they feel unworthy. And then the vulnerability, which is the second pronged part, says that if you're vulnerable, you're like a wussy, or that's not good, or that's bad. It's a terrible thing. The reality is that our vulnerability opens up the dialogue and the conversation for us to start to heal around the places that we feel unworthy or inadequate. So opening up that dialogue is critical. It's scary because we don't want to be looked at in shame. Well, what if people don't like me anymore? Or what if people think I'm a terrible person? Or what if they, all of those things. So here's the deal. For me, because I learned how to deal with this right away. Okay, I said, you know what? There was trauma from that particular, even till this day. Like, I don't know how to spell. I'm like the worst speller on the planet. But I tell people. And for me, before, it was embarrassing because I would be in school, or if I was, good morning, Poetic. Oh, I haven't seen you in a while. How are you? Cheers to you. If I was, so let's say, for instance, and this was one of the greatest fears I ever had, believe it or not. My greatest fear was to be called up to the chalkboard or during a presentation at a professional presentation and asked to be a scribe, because I didn't want my colleagues, right, around me to think that I was inadequate, or they might not think that I was worthy enough to be in their presence because I couldn't spell. And I would do everything to avoid it. Everything. Like, if I knew that they might be asking for a scribe, I might have got up and went to the restroom during that time and someone else can scribe. And I'm like, woof, I'm out of that one. Phew, thank God. Because I don't want people to look at me in shame like, oh God, you're a terrible speller. How did you get here? What do and all of the conversations that I thought they would have, because I really, intelligence to me was important. Like I wanted to be intellectual like my dad and articulate like my father, but I couldn't spell. So that made me stupid. And so this actually, this story of this particular time, it sort of, I got in trouble at school one time at a spelling bee because I was embarrassed to spell. I hated spell. Please don't let me spell. Why do I got to spell in front of a bunch of people? Why do you have to magnify the inadequacies within me? Why do I have to be exposed? It was awful. And it was a great fear of mine. And finally, okay, this is how I dealt with it. I finally accepted it. I just accepted it. I'm like, I don't spell well. And it was funny because people would laugh at me, right? I'd get laughed at because of it. And I finally just laughed at myself, and I'm like, I don't care. I don't know how to spell. So there, that's it. Simple. But it was scary to say it. So now, and it's true, it's seeped out into my professional life. So I work with the state of New Mexico, and I work on projects, right, with the Department of Health. And there are times when I would have retreats and I would scribe, or I would write what people were saying. And the first thing I would say is, I'm a terrible speller. And then I'd tell everybody, and it's daddy issues. So I'm going to need your help spelling throughout the presentation, just so you know. And I just put it out there. I just opened it up and said it. It was easier for me to say that at the beginning than to be up there, and I would shake when I would write, because I'm like, or I would just scribble because I was like, I don't even know how to spell this word, and I don't want them to know that I don't know how to spell. And so it became like this, I'm not good enough conversation. Okay. And so they know. So I work with a bunch of individuals. They laugh sometimes. They're like, Natalie, I'm like, I told you I can't spell. So, I just can't. So help me. I don't know. I know it sounds weird, but I don't. And it's because of the trauma that happened when I was a kid. I could have been maybe the best speller. Who knows? But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not being able to be a good speller, like at all. And I don't care. If you don't like it, it's your problem, not mine. I mean, it could be a problem, but we have spell check now. That's what I love. Yeah, that's exactly, yes, Rick, thank God for autocorrect. I swear to God. Sometimes autocorrect, though, gives you the wrong word. You have to go back and read. You're like, that's not the word I was trying to use. But, I've tried to get better at spelling. But I tell this story because it really did cause a lot of kind of trauma in my life. I was afraid. And I know it sounds weird, right? But we have those stories within our head, each individual, of these inadequacies that we have, and we're afraid. But the vulnerability, right? The vulnerability is courage. That's the courage to be able to say, you know what? I just don't know this. And I'm okay with that. It's accepting the weaknesses that we have at times. You don't have to be strong at everything. There are certain things in life that you're not going to be good at. I won't write a letter or anything without my phone. Spell check. Yes. And that's the funny thing. And that's another thing. You give permission. So if you see what's happening, you give permission for others to actually say, well, I don't know how to spell either. And it's quite interesting. As soon as I say it, because I've been in large crowds where I'm doing presentations in front of a lot of people, and I'm like, I don't know how to spell, you guys, so I'm gonna need your help. And then it's funny because everybody laughs and like, no one knows how to spell. Like, I don't know how to spell either. And sometimes you'll see that people, but they all start to feel comfortable, right? And if nobody, instead, imagine if I was up there, didn't know how to spell a word, and I was afraid, okay? And I'm looking to the audience, someone help me spell. If I'm afraid, then somebody else who doesn't know how to spell is going to be equally afraid. They're not even going to attempt. And then you hear silence. And then maybe a spelling bee guru will stand up and say, oh, you spell it like this. But oftentimes there's silence because more than not, there are a lot of people who don't know how to spell. But when I call it out at the beginning, right? If I say at the beginning, look, I don't know how to spell, I need your support, then it gives them permission to say, well, I don't know how to spell either, but I can try to help you. But I'm not that great at it either, but I'm kind of all right. It opens up the gate for them to say, you know what, it's okay if we're not good at this, but we can try it together. So that's what vulnerability does. It opens up the space for people to share their inadequacies as well, or what they feel they're inadequate about. And I'm not saying it's an inadequacy, but internally, I'm talking about, right? Internally, how we feel inadequate in certain parts of our life. We give permission for others to open it up. It takes a vulnerable person to admit these things, to open up and share these things, for others to start to open up. And that's why it's courageous to be authentic and vulnerable, because you're really the first to go. And then people follow that. That's why I'm okay to get on here and talk about my life stories, because I feel like I have nothing to hide. I just put it all out there on the table. And you either like me or you don't. And it's okay either way. I like myself. I'm not perfect. I'm human. But I love people, and I love myself, and I love myself enough to share, the darkest parts of my mind, in hopes that it helps you, in hopes that you're like, oh yeah, I can probably open up about this and be vulnerable. Just call it out. I'll read your quote in just a moment, Betty, but I want to talk about, so me, movies. It's funny because movies trigger in my head when I start talking. And the movie that I could think about that sort of shows a good depiction of what I'm talking about is 8 Mile with Eminem. I like okay, so the movie itself, I'm not a big fan of Eminem or anything, but I watched the movie, and the part that I love the most, and I could probably rewind and watch it, is at the end when he does his rap. How does he win the best rapper? By being vulnerable. That's actually an act of vulnerability. He just calls himself out completely. He says, yeah, I'm white trash. I don't know what he says. I lived in the trailer. I did this. I did that. I did this. I did this. Yeah. So now what? What else do you have to say about me? What about you? Where have you been authentic and real in your rapping? Are you just making it up? So that part of the movie, I thought, when I saw it, I was like, wow, that is badass. Like, literally, that's how I felt about it. I'm like, once you open up and you give it all, nobody can, what can people do? They can't attack you. There's nowhere to attack. And they're left silent. They're like, if I tell people, yeah, I can't spell. And another example of this is in Pitch Perfect, right? Fat Amy. She calls herself fat in front of all the girls. She's like, oh, I'm Fat Amy. And then they're like, did you just call yourself fat? And she's like, yeah, I say it so you don't talk shit behind my back, right? So you people don't talk behind my back. I just say it. And they're like, oh. So that's vulnerable. Being able to just call something out. And then where do people have to go? They have nowhere to go. So they're either going to be like, oh, okay. And then what they do is they start to appreciate you. And they start to trust you, because they're like, wow, this person, this individual is willing, right, to call out their what they feel is inadequate within them, be vulnerable and authentic, call it out, open up the space, right, and just call it out for what it is. And then they're like, wow, you're so authentic, right? You're authentic. Good morning, Ralph, William. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm authentic. And some people are afraid, and I get it. It takes courage to actually talk about those things inside of us, right? And I feel like men are, in order for the man in the Western world to heal, it's going to take, okay, part of it is going to take that openness to talk about how they feel inadequate and how society has not allowed them to talk about those things, has shoved it down their throat and told them to keep it in. I mean, the very, very, very nature of doing that, right? When we start to not talk about our inadequacies. We become very masculine in nature. This is men and women. When that happens, we end up with sociopaths, psychopaths, the inability to experience the emotional states of being. So, and it's up to you. Do I open up to vulnerability? Do I open up the gate? And you could do it a little at a time. For me, I call it out just the way it is. I'm just like, okay, here's what's going on with me. I just let it go. And I do it, and I speak from a place of authenticity, and it's called courage. You just do it over and over again. But once you practice it and you're able to let it out, you're not afraid. You're not afraid, because what's the worst that can happen, right? People are like, my reputation, my this. I've had people, professionals, be like, I wished I would have said things that you said. And I'm like, it's okay. You can when you're ready, but I'm going to speak authentically, because if I don't let out what's internally there that may not be correct, then what I'm holding it in, and I'm getting myself sick. So honor roll student in high school, my biology teacher, I told him I was going to fail his class because of my spelling. And he said, as long as you look like the word, as long as it looked like the word, thank God, I think it is. See? And now Betty is opening up about her spelling. See how it opens up when we're vulnerable and we talk about our pieces of us that we don't feel adequate in. Then other people are willing to share, because they're like, oh, it's a safe zone, because we're not making it wrong or judging it. And so, because forever I lived with that. I'm not good enough. They're going to think I'm stupid. All of these things, like, I want to get my PhD. It's like, how can I get my PhD if I don't even know how to spell, right? Like, what if these professors think I don't care. I just tell them straight out, I don't know how to spell. I can read. I can write. I'm intelligent, but I can't spell. So there. That's it. But we have spell check and dictionaries and stuff like that. And I don't mind if I have to do the extra work. I'm going to have to work extra hard. Well, we don't anymore, because we have Word and all that stuff, So my typing skills are good enough. They're adequate enough. I type pretty fast, but I have red all over, and I'm like, oh, darn it. I still haven't learned to spell that word. And I did have a sort of a spark of hope in a teacher that I had. Mr. Basin was his name. Good morning, Nicole. I remember his name, Mr. Basin. And he told me how to spell parallelogram, and I still remember it. And the thing is that I think, had I not had that traumatic experience, right, with my father, I would have been perfectly fine. But that one thing triggered a whole slew of things down the line. And it became a fear, I became afraid of words, right? And so because I became afraid of words, I ended up triggering this whole slew of like crazy stories of my spelling inadequacies. But I say, it's daddy issues. I tell people, because I've pegged it. I know exactly why it is what it is. And I'm like, it's my daddy issues. So I'm not going to get into that story. So typically, and people will laugh, like, I think it breaks the silence with people. So I'm giving a presentation, get up there, and I'm like, okay, everybody, just going to let you know, I'm not the best speller in the world. I'm probably going to need your help. And I call that my daddy issues. And we're not going to get into that. But if you want to know, you can ask me later. Most people will just start to laugh. They're like, daddy issues. And then I'm like, yeah, it's daddy issues. So it's okay. And it is. It came from my dad, from my father. You can speak to we the people. Thanks. Yeah, I speak a lot. So where I'm not good in spelling, I pick up in talking. I just talk a lot. Chatty. Yeah, I know words, right? It's like I can put a sentence together in my head, and I can write a sentence out. I know the parts of speech, a noun, a preposition, a verb. I know what they do. I can teach people. It is best to be upfront instead of faking the funk. Yeah, that's right. It's best to be upfront instead of faking the funk. That's right. Don't fake it. And people can feel when you're ingenuine. And me, it wasn't about me being ingenuine. I would get nervous and start to like shake. And then I was like, what do I do here? Or when another thing, oh, that's another thing that I would freak out. It's like when people would watch me write. So like I would be meeting with one of my professors, right? And I'd be taking notes on what they were saying. And they, for some reason, would look at what I was writing. I'm like, stop looking because I don't know how to spell. But I wouldn't tell them this. And so I was like, certain words I would just kind of like shorthand or something. And then I would look at my notes and be like, what the hell does that? It doesn't even make sense. I don't even know what I was trying to write. So it really did screw me up through my entire life, like literally until I just said, you know what? I don't even care. I'm surrendering. I'm going to be authentic and I'm going to just be vulnerable. Okay. And that's what vulnerability really is. That is the essence of vulnerability. Remember, watch 8 Mile. Watch that scene with Eminem, or watch Pitch Perfect when you have Fat Amy tell those girls, yeah, I'm fat. Okay. And what? She just calls it out. That's how she feels. You know, she knows that some people may say stuff about her. So she just puts it out there. And then they're like, oh, okay. And they have nowhere to go. And they're like, well, we like you. We like you enough that you're authentic enough to speak. Right. And then after that, it's not a thing. It's not a thing anymore. You know, it's not a thing. When I get on my meetings and I'm typing out notes and I misspell words and stuff, people just know, they don't say anything, or they start to help me with the words. They're like, da, 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 and I'm like, how do you spell that? And then they just tell me. And then they just kind of go, Natalie. I'm like, daddy issues. And that's all I say, daddy issues, you know? So again, vulnerability, and the feeling of shame, and in order for us to heal, in order for us to allow ourselves to, we've opened up that space. Okay. Open up the space for that to happen. Yeah. And it's funny that this is starting to come around because there's been a lot of talk, about, men being able to be vulnerable and talk about that. And I would just say, if you haven't been able to express where you feel inadequate, like I haven't done enough for my family, whatever it is, right? That you find somebody that you can open up to and that you can at least let it out. So you can find a healthy way to heal around it, right? And then once you heal, maybe you'll feel good enough to be able to articulate it and express it, right? And then when that happens, then people will start to share and engage, and you'll realize that we're more alike than we're not. More people will tell me they don't know how to spell than they don't. I've been in rooms and rooms of people, and then they're like, I don't know either. And then it's like, oh, okay, so we're not alone. We're not alone. That's the whole point. The point is when we open up to that space and we speak about it, we realize that we're not alone. We're not alone. People everywhere have the same conversations of unworthiness, the same conversations of inadequate, same conversations of disgust in themselves, same conversations. They all have that interconnection. We just don't talk about it because we've been made wrong to. Right? Don't talk about it. Just hide it. Well, and then we just hide it internally, and it comes out in anger, it comes out in frustration, comes out in depression, it comes out in all these things. And it's really because we're not allowing ourselves just to be honest with ourselves and to be able to communicate that and open up and talk about it and be authentic. So that's what authenticity is. It's really just being responsible, owning your own story, owning your own internal inadequacy. It doesn't mean you're inadequate, but internally we feel it. So it's that feeling of like, I'm not worthy enough. And then we say, oh, okay, I am worthy. I am enough. This doesn't make me a bad person because I don't know a spell. It doesn't make me terrible. It just means that I feel uncomfortable with me, but I can engage in that feeling. And then people are like, I feel it too. Okay, so there's bigger things, right? Obviously, but for me, spelling, of course, would be something like spelling for me that really screwed me up a little bit for a while there. Really, Natalie? Spelling and all things. Yeah, spelling. Okay, so there you have it. And I love you guys. And I think today's Thursday. Oh yeah, it's Thursday. So have a really awesome Thursday. And I'm going to continue on these topics, and hopefully they're helpful for you. And it's really diving into emotional intelligence, and what emotional intelligence really is, right? It's not just knowing your emotions. It's actually how the different effects show up in our life and impact us. And so I think I'm going to read the what is it? Healing through dark emotions, and it's about spiritual. It's about not spiritual alchemy, but emotional alchemy, which it's an amazing book. So I think once I'm done with this semester for college, then I will do it during that time between my next semester. So there you have it. Okay. So I love you guys. Have the best day ever. And remember, you're perfectly perfect. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Thank you, Ralph. Have a good day. Bye bye.